Hello, and welcome to Creative Banter, a creativity and philosophy-focused podcast where anything goes. I'm your host, Cody Schultz. Joining me is the one and only Ben Horn. In talking about Guy Tall's More Than a Rock, Ben and I find ourselves thinking about success and the idea of fading into obscurity, something which introverts especially relate to, I'm sure. Let's dive right into it, shall we?
Okay, you want me to start it out this time?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. What is going on, Cody? What is new with you?
Well, if last episode was not a COVID episode, this one is the butt end of one, for sure.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh. So
Yeah.
and now for the people listening right now, they might be wondering what's going on here because the last time we were recording, I was not feeling well. And just a couple hours after recording that, I went and got a PCR test, which strangely was negative. And it turned out just to be a summer cold. But then the week after that, when we were set to record, you weren't feeling so well. So it sounds like things didn't work out as well for you.
No, they did not. So my girlfriend's sister ended up getting it at one point, and then we had gone up to the mountains, my girlfriend and I and my family, and I guess because of contact or whatever I don't know. Regardless, I ended up getting it. I woke up, when was that? Was that Wednesday or Thursday of the past week when we were supposed to record? Woke up it hit me like a truck. And it was, not good. So luckily everything kind of settled down a couple days after. Like the weekend wasn't too terrible. Just a headache that I was dealing with and just fatigue and shortness of breath is the main thing that's going on. So yeah, it's no fun. Not a good time.
So in a way it was, we were teasing that it may have been the COVID episode that everyone was looking forward to, and then not so much, but then it kind of is in a way.
Yeah, the pre-COVID and after COVID episode.
Yeah, we just got to give the people what they want.
I guess so.
That's what they were asking for, so just went out of our way to make that happen.
I mean, the only downside right now is that I'm probably going to end up having to cancel my Adirondacks trip because, just doing the dishes, just standing around, that kind of deal. And like afterwards, I'm like, I'm going to go sit down for a little while. So I can't really imagine a 6-hour drive and then 3 nights of camping and hiking around being very, very good.
Yeah.
So,
that's one of the things I've heard from people that have had it, where it has that lasting impact and just the lingering sense. And I can't imagine wanting to go for hikes or anything along those lines when it's just the simplest of things become a little bit more challenging.
Yeah, absolutely. So I figured I may as well just nix that one and rest up, start to recuperate. A lot of people that I was talking to were saying that it's like 4 to 6 weeks or so before they felt good again to hike and do that kind of thing. So I figured that gives me enough time to recuperate some for Acadia, so I don't have to worry about canceling that one. And that's a bigger one anyway.
Yeah.
So that's all right.
Yeah,
it sucks, but it works out.
That's definitely a bummer, but hopefully it'll just sort of ease up with time, and that's not what we would want to have.
No, I would have much rather been dealing with this during the winter or something when I don't want to be outside doing stuff. But
yeah, and it was like when I started, it ended up being just a cold that I had, and it came on all of a sudden. So I started just going along the same lines of like, this is the start of it, which probably just made it feel worse than it was. And I don't even really, I mean, I work from home. I don't really go anywhere other than running some errands. But when it was just the cold that I caught, I was thinking that just a few days before then, I had gone kayaking down on the bay here in San Diego, and they had put in this new exercise equipment with these like monkey bars and this like rope climb and stuff like that. So I'm thinking like, oh, I must have caught it from that in terms of it just being a cold. But it's just weird that, you have COVID going around, but also there's a cold going around during the summer, and somehow, I don't know how it all works, but it's just, it's bizarre. And it sounds like at some point everyone's going to catch it, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's just the reality of it, is no matter how careful you are. I mean, it took 2 years, but it finally caught up, at least for me. So
yeah,
it was funny though, because my girlfriend and I were saying, because she was the only one out of her family at that point that didn't get it, and that weekend that her sister had it and was dealing with it, she was feeling fine. We were out chopping wood and working outside, that kind of thing. And then all of a sudden, like, I think Monday came around, and she started like sore throat kind of symptoms, and then all of a sudden it hit her hard. I'm like, oh great. I know exactly where this is going.
Yeah.
I know I'm bound to get it. I'm like, it took another like 2 or 3 days before it finally started hitting me. I was playing video games the one night, and I texted her. I'm like, yeah, it's coming, because my throat started to get like scratchy through the day. I'm like, yeah, well, luckily it wasn't symptomatically terrible, but at least on my end.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, it's no good.
Yeah. Well, on a different topic, a little while back, probably, I don't know, a month or so ago, I received an email from a listener of the podcast here. And he's a photographer I follow on Instagram. His name is Daniel Egger. He's from Austria. And he said that he was going to mail me something, and he wanted to know my P.O. box address. And so after a little while, he said, it's looks like it'll be there pretty soon. And so he lives in Austria. Yet when I went and checked my P.O. box, there was a package that came from here in the States. And I opened it up. I could tell it was a book. And opened it up, and it was a copy of More Than a Rock by Guy Tal. And he had heard our discussion about it, and I had mentioned that I had not yet read the book. And so he was kind enough to purchase the book and to send it to me. And so I've really been enjoying digging into that book. It's beautifully, this is the second edition.
Okay.
But just absolutely beautifully created, and reading through the essays. And I think I'm up to the 10th essay so far. So I don't know, maybe about 15% of the way through the book. But it was interesting. And how long ago was it that you had read his book?
We're going on about 3 years now.
Okay.
Yeah, and I had read the first edition copy of it.
Yeah, he had mentioned that in the sort of the introduction, or the first part of the book, that he had made some changes here and there. The core of it's the same, but he added a few bits here and there. And it's very interesting how many of the things that he says I very much relate to, and it's different concepts of photography and creativity, and I can kind of see in some cases where he's going, ahead of where he's going when he's setting up certain things. And there was a discussion in there where he was creating a distinction between creative photography and representational photography. Mm-hmm. Is that a discussion that you remember in the book?
Vaguely. It's been a while, and I read so much of his stuff between his articles, and this his newer book that he has out as well. So, but I do vaguely remember something along those lines. Yeah.
And it was kind of under an umbrella of discussing art, and he's clear to say that creative photography and representational photography are both very much under the umbrella of art, but he was placing greater emphasis on creative photography versus representational photography. And he was defining representational photography as essentially taking a photo of something as it is, versus versus creative photography, where it's a matter of trying to convey something with that image and maybe not being a literal representation of the subject itself. And it was interesting because I was going through, and this is something we've talked about a little bit in the past in the podcast, but I was thinking a bit about it, where it is that my photography falls under there. And I feel like I'm somewhere between the two, but oftentimes I think I tend a little bit more towards representational. And there was a quote in there which was interesting, that when he was talking about representational photography, basically saying that with representational photography, the photographers dismiss their own role beyond the mechanics of operating a camera, in terms of not necessarily, I'm trying to think about how to phrase it, but basically saying that, you know, I'm the one pushing the button, but I'm just trying to capture something for what it is, as opposed to creating deeper meaning into it. And I know that we had talked a little bit about this, but I was thinking about how with representational photography, at least my viewpoint on that is, I see something and it inspires a certain feeling within me. And simply trying to replicate that scene in an image, not taking artistic, creative license necessarily, but just trying to be very faithful to that scene, for me anyways, is kind of the best way for me to replicate the feeling I had when I saw that subject in the print. And having a strong deviation from reality takes me out of it. So I thought it was interesting how he was placing even more emphasis on the creative side, versus I feel like there's also much to be said about the representational side and drawing inspiration from nature. And that's something certainly where, you know, black and white is going to kind of go in a different direction. But then I started thinking about something else. And there was a quote a while back I remember seeing on Twitter. And it was from Clyde Butcher, who is a tremendous photographer. I absolutely love his work.
Yeah.
And there was a quote from him which I thought was a little bit interesting. So I'm going to read this quote to you. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. And you might already know what the quote is. But here's the quote. "Only in black and white can I see design and textures. I don't consider color photography art. Black and white is an interpretation. Color is a duplication." Is that a quote you've heard before?
It is, yeah. It's one of those quotes that I've kind of gone back and forth a bit about.
Yeah.
Some days I agree with him, and other days I am just thinking, what are you thinking? Saying that color isn't necessarily an artistic pursuit when it comes to photography. Like, I can see that it's a duplication, but at the same time, it's so much more than that too. It kind of demeans color photography and just puts it at a very basic level when it's not always that.
Yeah, and that was my initial instinct as well, because I think we live in a very very polarized world where people look at something and they see something perhaps more divisive than it was intended to be. And so I looked more carefully at the quote from Clyde Butcher, and I'll read it one more time here, because I kind of tripped over my words the first time. All right, so here's, only in black and white can I see design and textures. I don't consider color photography art. Black and white is an interpretation. Color is a duplication. So when I read through the second time, I found that there is a bit more emphasis in simply the word I. So he basically saying that he doesn't consider color photography art. Not as opposed to saying color photography isn't art. So there's a big distinction there, because I think he's talking more about for his own process and for his own stuff, as opposed to more of a generalized statement. And in that sense, I'm fully on board with that, because I do remember seeing that he had done some color work early on and then gravitated towards black and white, because for him that was, that's more so the language that speaks to him in terms of working in black and white.
Yeah, he had done a lot of color back in the day. I remember he had done a ton of art shows, and that was how he made a lot of his made his living. If I remember right, he even had a clock making company where he would put his photographs as the face of the clock, and he made a ton of money off of that whole business before selling it. But when his son died in a car accident, that's when he kind of went back to black and white. I think that was in the late 80s. I think 86, if I remember right, something along those lines. That's kind of what drew him back into black and white. But yeah, I can see him, I can see both sides of that. The very personalized, the heavier emphasis on I, and his whole interpretation of it. But I kind of can't help but feel as though color could be interpretation as well, because
it is.
You look at so many different, even if you're looking at so many different animals, and the fact that different animals are going to see different colors than what we can, and the truth of the matter is that not every single individual sees a Granny Smith apple as the same green, even though you're looking at the same thing. So
that's true.
I think there's plenty of interpretation that can be done with color as well. Like I said, I struggle with that quote, and have for a while, just because I can see both sides to it, but it just seems very as if you're trying to simplify things to too far of a degree.
Yeah, and also I'll say that when I was reading the essay from Guy Tall, it was also the sort of thing where he's speaking more positively of creative photography. I mean, he's very clear to say that both representational and creative photography, they're both art, and they both can be good, they both can be bad. There's all different flavors within there. But certainly for his own work, he has really found that creative photography is the key. But I think if a person were either just sort of glancing at the quotes from either Clyde Butcher or from Guy Tall in these situations, especially in as divisive as a world that we live, I think people will read into it things based on their own bias, their own situations. And so that's why I think it's important just to take them in and to think about how that applies to the person who's saying it in the context within. Because it seems like a lot of times with art, when people try to define art, it's often done through exclusion, by saying what isn't art as a way of defining what is art. And it gets tricky because there is, and this is also something where Guy Tall was was speaking of art and defining it. He had a really good definition for it where I don't want to put words into his mouth because I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but basically it's something that is manufactured, and I forget what the rest of it was. But essentially he had a pretty good definition for it, but it's such a difficult thing to define. And I think it's just important to know that, with things as divisive as they can be, that there's so many different interpretations for simple quotes. And I think it's why it's good to just to slow down and take things in, as opposed to, reacting in a way that social media typically has I think trained so many people to do these days.
Yeah, I mean, even with quotes like that, or if you're reading something from an individual like Guy, and though you may not necessarily agree with what he's saying word for word, it's always important to kind of understand that there are always snippets of it that you can not necessarily agree with, but learn from. And just because one person's approach to photography doesn't necessarily align with your own doesn't mean that there isn't something that you could be trying that's different that might work out a little bit better. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
I was on Petapixel the other day, and I noticed all of this talk on Instagram and the downfall of the platform, which I always think is quite interesting to see from like an outside perspective because of me not being on it, and just kind of seeing what the general consensus is for a lot of the decisions that they're making and that kind of thing. But I saw one article that was talking about a photo sharing app dubbed the anti-Instagram, which apparently has been soaring in popularity recently. And it's called Be Real. And the tagline is "Your friends for real." You know anything about this? Hear anything about it?
I mean, I've heard it mentioned, but I am not familiar with it.
Okay.
Though I do know that there's definitely been a lot of people who've been dissatisfied with what has happened with Instagram lately.
So Be Real came out, I think, a couple years ago, just quietly. I remember it very vaguely coming out and just kind of disappeared under the radar again. Kind of how it works, from my understanding of it, is you create an account, and instead of being able to just hop on and post a picture whenever you want, they instead give you a 2-minute time frame each day that's randomized where you can post a photograph. And it's supposed to be more of a genuine interaction, like with your friends, showing them what you're doing at that moment, because you have this 2-minute time period, and when you take a photograph, it takes a selfie of you along with a photograph of whatever is in front of you or whatever you point your camera at. So it's an interesting idea. I don't necessarily think that it's going to be anything decent for photographers like us, or even something more than just playing around. But it just got me thinking about the whole Instagram ordeal and just how they're trying to implement all of this different stuff into their platform, because about a week or so after I had seen this, they implemented something very similar into their own platform, or at least began to. Yeah, they started, you kind of have to dig for it, and it's not like as obvious as their copying of like TikTok and that kind of thing, but it's nonetheless, they took that idea and were like, oh, well, this is clearly popular, so we're gonna snag that up.
Yeah.
But it's, like I said, it's just something that's interesting, because I also think you were saying before we started recording that Vero is making a comeback as well, or trying to. I remember that from 2018, and that was a whole well, didn't really get up onto that. I think I created an account and then realized that guys like Alex Noriega and them were instantly like had massive followings. I'm like, I can't keep up with this anyway. So
Yeah, you get that sort of that rat race
yeah,
kind of feel when all of a sudden there's a new platform that emerges and everyone jumps on it. And I also had created a account there back in 2018, and I remember at the time I don't think they had the server support for it as much as they needed, so it was slow, it was buggy, it would crash. But with Instagram going to the point where it's now just they're really pushing the reels because they want to try and be a TikTok clone. And then you had mentioned how with they're trying to start copy what Be Real is doing. It's just that copying everything that's popular mentality, which I think is what leads to so much of what's wrong with our society. Not really trying to be one for original ideas, but simply just jumping on trends of whatever is popular in the name of a buck. But yeah, I logged back on to Vero. I don't know if it's Vero. I guess it looks a little bit more like Vero. I suppose
whichever.
that's a flaw in the platform if the pronunciation is not immediately apparent right out of the gate. But I logged back in, or at least I tried to log back in. I couldn't find my account because I made it with some obscure email address. So I created a new account, and I gotta say that the experience thus far has been quite nice, because it's simply just people sharing their photos, lots of good comments and good interaction, and it just feels so much nicer than Instagram, where you're just bombarded with the reels of people trying to be Insta famous and everything else, and then just ads nonstop.
Which I heard that they're doubling down on and trying to add put in any even more ads and stuff like that to Instagram, which is always good to hear.
Yeah, it's especially woven into the stories and then also into the feed. And it just became rather obnoxious. And I think there was an update to the app that some people got that I don't think I've gotten, where it's supposed to be even worse. But it just, with the lack of engagement and them sort of pushing their own thing, I'll say that Vero, whatever we're going to call it, I suppose we'll probably have it in show notes. It's a better format for displaying photos. I feel like the interaction is far more genuine. People aren't pushing things. We don't have people pushing all kinds of things and stuff along those lines. So I will say it has reminded me a little bit of getting kind of those early days of getting into photography, where everything's just kind of nice and new and fresh and a new perspective on things before we get too jaded with everything social media. But the other thing too I also wanted to mention is that when you do see a platform like Instagram, and they suddenly make changes overnight, and then they just have massive numbers of people that just feel somewhat alienated by it, you do realize that you're just at the mercy of the platform, which I think is why it's very important to have your own website as something that you can control. You can control how your images are displayed, the specific content that's on there. So if anything, I think this really makes that ever more important. And it's not too tough to get a pretty good website these days.
No.
I feel like this is going to turn into a Squarespace app.
Yeah.
I guarantee it will not. I do use them.
Yes,
but I
so
think
do I. But it's still one of those, every YouTube video that you watch seems to be sponsored by Squarespace. Takes 2 minutes to make a website. And I think we know the tagline, yeah. Yeah, I mean, by all means, if they want to. No, I do agree that there is definitely going to be some kind of drive back towards websites, and I think there should be, because like you were saying, you have so much more freedom of formatting it at least for the most part, how you want it to. I
Yeah.
think Squarespace actually, I just seen, came out with an update that's trying to make it even more free, how you can format your website and organize things how you want. Because there obviously are restrictions and stuff like that unless you custom build your own site. But nonetheless, I yearn for the day that we are able to just send out newsletters and have people focus on newsletters again rather than
Yeah.
the constant scrolling and clicking of social media and that kind of deal.
Yeah.
I saw another app that I think right now it's only on like the website kind of thing. I think it's Granary.
Yeah, I've heard about that one as well.
I forget who had mentioned it. I think on YouTube I saw something, but that one seemed interesting too. There's definitely people out there trying to combat Instagram, but
Yeah.
I think the problem comes along of everyone's trying to be the anti-Instagram instead of just coming up with their own unique idea and just kind of the focus of being anti-Instagram just isn't going to work because people are only going to get so sick of Instagram before they realize I don't even want to be on an anti-Instagram platform. I just kind of want to be on a platform that's unique, that's different.
Yeah.
But
and that's definitely where, as you'd mentioned, like when it comes to like newsletters and stuff, that's honestly probably the best way to have the reach to people who are interested in one's work. And then with a website, simple things like you can control, which photos are displayed next to each other. I mean, simple things like that make all the difference in the world. That on a social media platform, it's not really well suited for that.
I think social media is great for real quick, here's my work, here's just a very basic kind of thing, like quick snapshot of your work, so to speak. And then the website should be more of like here is my absolute best work. Like I like how Sean Tucker has always used his Instagram and kind of playing part to the fiddle of posting daily and all of that kind of thing to keep engagement up, but just kind of having it like a scrapbook of his work rather than saying this is the best that I can do.
I just use it mostly for cat and dog pictures. That's been my formula for success right there.
I mean, so, hey, clearly something is working. So,
yeah.
But I think that kind of goes into something else that I wanted to talk about was the defining of success and the reality versus the expectation that you had, like what you expected your life and your artistic pursuits to be versus how they kind of turned out. I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's definitely a very, very interesting topic. Because I think in most cases our expectations are constantly shifting and adjusting, and in kind of going back to our episode last week when I was talking about how I was skating around the lake, and then I've started going skating again, and then was skating around the same lake listening to the same playlist as before, and just thinking about where I wanted to go with my photography at that time. And then, heading back there again, listening to the same thing and realizing that I've kind of mostly achieved what I wanted to. It's interesting because I'm not sure exactly how to describe it other than the fact that I've just basically eliminated a lot of the things that I didn't want to do. Is kind of, and then just kind of ended up being what I wanted to do. And I do, define it as being successful at what I'm doing. But also, I don't know. It's definitely feels like a bit of a moving target. There's always something a little bit later down the line. And I'm very fortunate to be in a position where I'm able to to do what I enjoy for a living. But I don't know. It is interesting. I feel like, and this is something we talked about in the past episodes as well, that the end result is mostly that time is just going way faster than before. And I'm doing more of what I like to do, but I feel like time is just speeding up. So that it has me wondering, like, is this really the ideal situation? Because pretty soon it's going to be like, all right, well, it's time to retire.
If that even happens for a photographer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
No, go ahead.
Though I was going to say that, like, I think at some point the thought of being in a position where I can just go on a trip somewhere and shoot photos without all the work that comes after it, I think that would be nice. I guess that's kind of the retirement sort of situation there, where you're at a point where, like, you know, maybe I don't have to do the videos, I don't have to do the portfolios, I don't have to do all that stuff, and it's just purely enjoying it for what it is. But I will say that working from home and doing what I enjoy, everything else just kind of becomes a blur. And I think one also loses perspective. The more you do something, you lose perspective of, I mean, I'm still extremely grateful for what I'm doing, but it just, at a certain point, you don't really, I guess the novelty wears off a little bit.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah. And at a certain point, I think with sort of the human existence, is that you always find contrast in things. No matter where you are in life, there's something that's going to be considered very good. There's something that's going to be considered very bad. And if you're in a very, very good situation, you know, there's always going to be something that's great there. But there's always something that's going to be not great. But that thing that's not great, as seen from a different perspective, would probably be seen as something that's very good. And likewise, if you're in a very, you know, bad place in life, you know, whatever you see as being such a really good thing at that point in time, you know, from a different perspective, it would not seem like it's all that great. So there's kind of like this weird thing where we find this contrast in life, whereas, you know, certain things that are a lot of work for me right now are things that, you know, maybe in the past I looked at, I'm like, oh man, I wish I could be doing that at some point in time. So it's kind of an odd thing, really.
Yeah.
But the fact that time is going so fast, that's the part that I'm a little bit hesitant about.
My girlfriend recently got a contract for teaching. She finally got a job. And it kind of got me thinking about, like, both success, but also, like, the idea of the hedonic treadmill and the fact that your level of happiness is almost always stagnated. Like, you have spikes and you have peaks and valleys and all of that, but at the end of the day, you are following along a very same path for your happiness. And
yeah,
which gets brought up because she was saying how, yeah, she got this job and it wasn't exactly what she wanted. It's not the school that she was really hoping to be into or anything like that, but nonetheless, it's a 1-year contract that she got, and it's still her first big girl job, so to speak. And
yeah,
it just got me thinking on success and this whole idea, like you were saying, about trying to figure out where your next target is, because there's always going to be some kind of moving target that you're striving for, whether it's writing for some magazine or getting X amount of followers on YouTube or whatever. But I think there's also a downside to having metrics like that you can't necessarily control for when you're defining success. I mean, I think of this, and I've had this sticky note up here for a while now, that I never in a million years would have thought I'd be making a podcast with the person who got me into landscape photography.
That's cool.
For me, that's a huge success. Like the person that, for the most part, got me not only into landscape photography, but also into film photography and helped me to progress to the point where I am now, I'm talking to just about every week, doing a podcast with.
That is a cool perspective.
So I think there's this idea that, and whether it's a Western idea or whatever about success, but the fact that even something like that should be constituted as being so much more important than if I were to sell 1,000 prints or something like that.
Yeah.
Like there should be a certain level of joy that you get from one versus the other. I just think it's important to kind of redefine what we consider to be successful in a successful life. Because like you were saying, the absolute goal, if we could ever figure it out, and if you figure it out before me, please do let me know, of being able to just, go out, enjoy taking photographs and not have to worry about doing a damn thing afterwards, because that would be very nice, not have to worry about prints or worry about anything else besides just enjoying life.
Yeah. And I think in many ways embodying that feeling that we got when, so many of us got into photography, when it was something, magical and new, and you're just, wanting every opportunity to go out and grab your camera and point it at things. I think sort of recapturing that, combined with taking a moment every now and then. This is something that I did on my backpacking trip. Most recently, when I was hiking into the location, I just kind of like stopped as I'm hiking through this riverbed. There's some grasses and some cottonwood trees, and it's kind of toward the evening and a little bit of a breeze, and I just kind of stopped and looked around, and I'm just like, this is cool. This is like, this is my job. This is what I do for a living. And just thinking like, this, just seeing things through that lens of gratitude, to in some ways think back to, a while back and maybe some of the goals that we had early on. And that also has me thinking about another essay that I had read in Guy Tal's book, where he was basically talking about the life that he leads right now, living in a small town in southern Utah. And it is basically, that's all he really wants for himself. He doesn't want to have the big extravagant things. He doesn't want to have the, everything that comes with, a huge, social media presence and all that sort of stuff, but simply to be able to go out, to shoot photos, to write. And that's something that I very much related to. And this is something where I think, people certainly need to be able to, or need to read the book in order to get the most and get all the nuance out of that. But basically just not having a desire to do anything. He basically just saying that he built himself the life that he loves.
Yeah.
And that's something that I very much related to, because I have no desire for the rat race of everything that is, trying to game the system on YouTube or social media or this or that, or trying to appeal to masses, but just staying true to yourself. Mm-hmm. And I think that's definitely a very important thing, and something that's very easily lost with everything these days.
Yeah, I've talked to him before about that whole idea, and he even told me before that the life that he leads now isn't even exactly what he had wanted, per se. The fact that he is like this, I don't want to go so far as like saying a celebrity within the photography world, but at the same time he kind of is, and he wasn't expecting that, he wasn't wanting that, even if he could make it work so that he didn't have to make any money off of writing or photography at all, and he could just go through his days as he does, I don't think that he definitely would. He would definitely just kind of disappear into the background from what I've gotten from talking to him. And I can't help but relate to that on a very personable level of just be nice to just kind of be in the background of the world, just doing my own thing and just going by, but trying to make a living off of that and sustaining such a lifestyle is kind of difficult.
Yeah. And actually, as you were talking there, and I was just kind of making some notes there. One of the things I wrote down as you're talking about is like just the phrase "fade into obscurity." And honestly, for me, that is something that would actually be a very desirable thing. Just so, if one didn't need to earn a living from anything, if one just happened to be independently wealthy, just happen to have mortgage, got bills to pay, you don't have to worry about stuff. I'd be very happy enough to fade into obscurity to the point where I can just do my own thing, no pressure, and just creating images, creating art, just really for myself. And in some ways, I think back to some of the days, like some of my early visits to Zion, back in 2009, 2010. It was kind of nice just to be able to basically kind of go anywhere and shoot anything and not have any sort of pressure associated with it. But just kind of like the early days of photography, when one is just going through that cycle of learning the craft and experimenting a lot. And so I look very fondly upon those days, because it is different now with the pressure that goes with it. But yeah, I'd be happy enough to fade to obscurity. The other phrase I'll use sometimes is that basically I would be the worst game show contestant. I'm not the type who's going to be like, going for the big prize and doing all the risks and stuff. If I show up there and, I get $50 and then they say, hey, you can wager that for, getting $200. I'm like, you know what?
I'm good with the 50.
$50 is good with me. It's more than I showed up with.
Yep.
I'm fine with that. And I'd be the guy that walked and be horrible TV.
I think it's funny you say horrible TV though, because I was in one of my classes, I think back in the spring, we were talking about game shows and like how they're so different when you get like the Great British Bake Off versus the Americanized version of it, because over there they're not doing it for prize money. The competition is totally different. It's not like as diehard competitive as what it is in America here. Whereas like with us, we want to see something. We want to see people go really hard at it, and they want to win big money, and they're super like competitive against each other and don't help each other. But over there, they're like, yeah, we're just kind of enjoying this. Like, you need help baking something, then all right, cool, I'll be over in a second, kind of deal. Which is just
interesting.
Yeah, it was a very weird realization that came along with that we're so competitive in this country, which goes along with the idea of success and the fact that we always want more than what somebody else has, not even just the same, but definitely more than that.
I wonder how that affects the results between the two different approaches.
I'd almost guarantee you that you get better results in the, let's say, European perspective than you do in the American.
That's what I would think as well.
Because you think about it like a community like NPN, and the fact that everybody there, for the most part, I'd say, is there to help each other when they go into that community, versus something like Instagram, where the only reason that people even comment or interact with you at all is, for the most part, so that they can get seen or have a chance of getting seen.
Yeah.
And there's no reason to comment on Kylie Jenner's posts. like at all. There's no reason behind it, but you still get people who do comment because they think, oh, maybe someone else will see my comment and visit my page full of cat memes and dog photos.
Yeah, it does seem like whether it is the sort of the American way of doing the TV show or, social media culture, it really is the loudest and oftentimes the most obnoxious stuff that rises to the top.
Unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah, which it doesn't reward creativity. It just rewards essentially a formula for success that others have used, and it doesn't really reinforce. Because I would imagine that in the analogy of the British show versus the U.S. version, I would imagine that there's going to be more true collaborations. And I don't like the word collaboration because that one, it's just been twisted so much and it just becomes an ad for some random company like, do you want to collaborate? No, we don't want to sell your blenders on my landscape photography channel. But like a true exchange of ideas, and so much better. In thinking back to when you're talking about NPN, a little while back, so they have these guest critique sessions.
Yeah.
And Alex Noriega was doing the critiques, and it was fascinating to read through his critiques and all the detail and nuance and everything that he was pointing out in these images. And it was so incredibly refreshing for someone to spend that much time and effort on a person's work and being so thoughtful about it, as opposed to just, you throw that same image on Instagram and there's just going to be lots of emojis and all kinds of
very
stuff.
Base level stuff.
Yeah, and that's just it's not a good level of interaction in any way, because it's an interaction based on, it's like a transactional interaction where a person's looking for something in return, as opposed to a good, solid critique of the work, like on NPN, which is just, it was so refreshing to read all those critiques that he did. And he did a lot of critiques. I mean, I don't know how he had enough time, but it was very, very impressive to see.
Yeah, speaking on those critiques, we actually have over on NPN, I think Alistair Ben is coming up soon, doing a critique guest.
Cool.
Just for anyone listening that wants to see what Alistair has to do or has to say with their work, because I think it's going to be much the same with that, because you on a platform like NPN, that you are able to take that time and you go on there willing to take the time, the half hour or whatever, to have genuine interaction with other people. I think that's always a good thing.
Yeah, for sure. I hope you enjoyed our creative banter. You can learn more about Cody's work by visiting his website, codyschultz.com. And you can find my work at benhorn.com. For further discussion, join us at patreon.com/creativebanter. It's a place where we can interact with you, the listener. And although we greatly appreciate those who contribute by joining a tier, discussions are open to everyone, whether you're a paying member or not. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you around next time.